Hey everyone! In today's review, the mean witch Dranya is sending her puppets down the well. We're going to look at the Disgaea Steam take on a hardcore first-person dungeon crawling RPG, so check it out. If I had to pick one genre that's huge in Japan and not really as loved over here, I'd have to say it's the first-person dungeon crawler. Several of these niche JRPGs have come out here over the last little while. It's funny because even though the kind of progenitor of the series Wizardry was developed in the US, it really hit big in Japan. And while we only got about 10 Wizardry games over here, they got close to 50. It's a tough genre to get into. It typically has more of a focus on deep RPG combat, exploration, and a high difficulty curve. And this is where I have to trade in some of my gamer cred because I don't really stick with these games for that long. And I've tried. Since the emergence of the cult series Etrian Odyssey and other interesting titles like Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey and Mary Skelter, even Persona Q, which I love for the characters, I just can't stick with them for too long before moving on. NIS America sent us a code to check out Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk, so Michelle and I poured dozens of hours into this game to see what it brings to the genre. We reviewed the Switch version, so the footage that's shown is from there. Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk is a first-person dungeon crawling RPG by some of the team that worked on Disgaea, including its producer. And like Disgaea, Labyrinth of Refrain takes the defining design elements of its genre, in this case party customization and exploration, and pushes them to the extreme. The game was originally released in Japan on the Vita in 2016 and on the PS4 there last year, and NIS is bringing it out in English on the PS4, Switch, and Steam on September 18th. The game takes place in the town of Refrain, where Madame Dranya has arrived with her assistant Luca to investigate a mysterious well that leads to a sprawling underground labyrinth. Only one explorer has ever returned from the well's depth and wrote a book which covers their exploration. Dranya and Luca have this book and are using it to investigate the well, but they can't enter it themselves. The labyrinth is full of a poison miasma that would kill any humans, so Dranya uses her magic to make puppet soldiers that go in and do the exploring for them.
To explore the labyrinth and survive. She had the Tractatus de Monstrum.
Your role isn't as Dranya or the puppets directly, you play the book itself after your fading soul takes refuge in it at the beginning of the game.
How do you feel? Your soul just went into this book. But this is no ordinary book. Why, this feared, cursed book is known as the Tractatus de Monstrum. And from now on, that's what you are. Beneath the town of Refrain, there is an unexplored underground labyrinth.
As the book, you can't really talk, but there are some dialogue options where you can assert your will positively, negatively, or just stay silent. The overall presentation of the game feels very traditional for the genre. I was expecting a bit more in terms of how events are presented and animations are handled, but it's clear the designer's intentions were for the presentation to remain true to the spirit of the genre. Visually, each dungeon looks different, which is good, but within each dungeon there's not really much variety. With these games, I prefer there to be distinct rooms in a dungeon, just areas that stand out and look different and give you that feeling of discovery when you come across something like that, and there wasn't so much of that. Character designs are very anime style, and the game really leans into its anime tropes. They're well done for what they are, and do have some really interesting designs. I'm just letting you know if you can't tell from the footage how anime this game is. Some of the enemy designs are really interesting, and maybe the most standout part of the visual style of the game. The entire game is dubbed in English, and there's an option to switch over to Japanese voices for people who prefer those. Getting into the labyrinth itself, in the dungeon you move around the group of puppets and give them commands in battle. The introduction to the game isn't really the best first impression. The game doesn't give you too much tutorial information, but some of what it does give you comes off as obscure, because it explains mechanics that you won't be introduced to for a while. It also kicks your ass up front. It's clearly designed to teach you that dying isn't as punishing as it is in other games, since you lose some items and a smaller large percentage of your collected mana, but you can keep a fair amount of what you got and just go back in. The first couple fights with your created party will likely have some of your members die, and you may walk into traps that will guarantee your death. Basically, you start off underprepared, but thankfully that feeling doesn't last long. Once you gain a couple levels and get a couple helpful skills, like one that lets you see the enemies in the maze so you can avoid or ambush them, you'll be moving through the dungeons pretty quickly, without the need to worry about dying all the time. There's still a lot of challenges that will take you out quickly, but you mostly get the hints to avoid them until you're strong enough.
Stay focused, everyone!
Hold this formation, okay? There. Everyone.
I can...
Dungeon layouts are pretty complex. Even with the auto map, it's not too easy to get around. There's plenty of shortcuts to unlock, obstacles, traps, teleporters, story events, and even some stealth sections depending on the area. There's also lock chests which you need keys for, and those can be tough to find. Like I said earlier, and like other dungeon crawlers, there's quite a few different environments that are pretty different from each other, so visually you're not stuck in caves the whole time. You always have a current objectives to complete while exploring. Sometimes it's finding certain items or just progressing further, but you usually have to report back to Madame Jonya after it to advance the story. Your secondary goal in the labyrinth is to collect mana. You can find this on walls or just floating around or get it by beating enemies. Mana can be exchanged back to your base for extra skills. These are necessary to help you explore the dungeon and further enhance your party. You can also use it to release sealed items you find, or to perform alchemy to strengthen or disassemble equipment. Each dungeon has a mana density limit. Basically, if you carry more mana than that limit, the Dungeon Reaper will come after you and mess you up. You do get a fair amount of warning and can usually get out of the dungeon by then, but if you get trapped, prepare to die because it is an extremely tough optional boss. Once you leave the dungeon though, it all resets, and so you can just go back in and keep collecting. There's also sub-objectives that Luca gives you. You can review these at your base and then turn in the requested items to get rewards, so they're basically just finding items in the dungeon and turning them in. As far as traversal goes, you move through the labyrinth like any other first-person dungeon crawler. You can also jump over some pits, although there are some that you can't jump over and will fall into for better or worse. The biggest exploration skill you get early on is the wall breaker skill. This lets you break any brownish wall on the map, and there are a lot of them. Many of them don't go anywhere, but each dungeon level has quite a few hidden paths you can and sometimes need to find by breaking the walls. Your use of these skills are limited by your reinforcement points, so once you run out you can't be breaking any more walls or doing any other dungeon skills, but they replenish as soon as you leave the dungeon. Also, while progressing in the dungeons, you'll find antechambers, which are like warp rooms. They let you easily move around the different dungeons and return to your base. Before we get into combat, I want to talk about party customization, because that is where the game shines, and is likely the make it or break it feature for fans of the genre. You'll spend a lot of time in this game managing your party because of its unique Coven Brigade system. Basically, you create new puppets as you find new soul gems. You can choose from the 6 starting classes, and 2 more are later unlocked. The classes are specific variations of the standard attacker, defender, and magic user classes that you expect from RPGs. Each class offers several customization options, including 3 different character designs, 3 voice options, a ton of personalities that affect stats, 3 growth options which affect how their stats grow, 3 stance options which give stat benefits, the choice of one of several unique class skills, and more. You can also unlock new options for a lot of these things by finding them in the labyrinth or purchasing them with mana. Puppets start at level 1 but are fairly quick to raise in level to get closer to your stronger party members.
Nice to meet you, shithead.
Once you've got your puppets done, you assign them to a coven. Covens are basically mini groups that you combine your puppets into. They can have up to 3 attackers and 5 supporters in each, and have different skills that the group can use. Some slots have special requirements like only male or female puppets. Finding these coven packs are a pretty big deal, as you start off with ones that only let you have 1 puppet in it, and you really want to get to the ones that have 8. Your brigade is made up of 5 covens, so you can basically have a 40 character party with 15 attackers and 25 supporters. This is a huge party obviously, and it's a thing that makes the game really fun to progress in, and watch as your party gets bigger and bigger, and you slowly but surely get more puppets and witch packs that let you build up to that full party size. The attackers all attack separately in combat, so it's crazy to watch that many attacks go by in a round, but it uses the whole unit's turn to use one of the combat skills. Your brigade can also benefit from formations. You can set each coven to either advance guard or rear guard, which are basically the front and back rows. Some classes do better in the back row and others should be in the front. Formations give your brigade a stat boost based on arranging your covens in a specific pattern. So yeah, quite a bit to get through there. I hope I explained it all right. Basically, you build a huge party for single fights and it's a ton of fun to see it grow. Combat itself may seem like standard fare for this type of game, but there's a ton of beneficial effects you get for setting up your party right. You can choose skills, attack, or use the handy Fortify Coven option, which is a great defensive move that can tie into some skills. You can also just have the whole party attack with one button, which is great for easier battles, but I wish there was also a faster speed to let those battles go by quicker. There's also a kind of random attack chaining bonus called Resonance that will increase your attack, as well as a donum, that's what the spells are called in this game, echo effect, that can come into play as you or your enemy use skills. This can result in a powered up skill usage. The effects of both resonance and donum echoes are influenced by the power source stat, which builds up throughout a battle, and if the enemies are the one who use the donum echo effect, then they'll use up that bar. One other aspect to battles is the gore hit, which is basically a super critical hit that feels really good when you land one and really crappy when you take a hit with one. It's just a really strong version of a critical, but it'll also cripple your soldiers if the enemy performs it on you. The hit puppet will lose a limb and their HP will be severely decreased. You can repair your puppets when you get back to base, but while you're still in the dungeon, they'll be really limited, especially if they lose a couple limbs. How well you set up your party as you get new puppets can really set you up for success or failure in combat, but like any RPG, equipment plays a huge factor in how strong your party is. Thankfully, the game includes an optimize button for each character, so you can easily go through and just pick the best equipment for them automatically, because I know I couldn't handle having to manually manage the equipment of such a big party. You can't buy equipment, so you'll be finding most of that in the dungeon. And while that's decent stuff, you'll need to use alchemy to get a leg up on your enemies. Alchemy lets you use up your older weapons to power up a main one, and it's actually a pretty time consuming part of the game, so I wish there was some more auto options here for players like me who just don't want to get that specific with it. Getting back into the narrative, the game stars the rough but hot anime trope Madame Dronya, who's a witch with a capital B. Along with her polar opposite apprentice Luca, she sets up base in Refrain. The town is filled with other interesting and quirky anime personas that the two interact with, and there's a ton of mystery surrounding each character, Dronya herself, the Labyrinth, the town which gets filled with strange monsters at night, and the strange characters you meet while exploring the dungeons.
Hey, I gotta work right now. I'll feed you later, but you gotta wait right here, okay?
No one has ever gotten out alive. Well, that's why we have the Tractatus de Monstrum and the puppet soldiers. Shut up! You'll draw attention to us. No sound of impact. Interesting.
Papa! You killed Papa! You're so mean, Madame Dronya! Papa!
Ugh, all this racket over one sheep.
It's an interesting way to add characters and individual stories to a game where the focus is on building your party with characterless puppets. The tone of the game is very strange. Dronya is a horrible person, which seemed off at first, but led to some real shocking moments throughout the game. A lot of the game really seems to be going for the shock factor, with the occasional swearing and unexpected violence scenes and out-of-place sexual advances from side characters. I'm all for sex and swearing where it works, but I'm not quite sure it does here. There's some genuinely hilarious scenes mixed in with the typical anime-style comedy sketches. But in general, the tone is all over the place in the narrative events, and some of them will leave you asking why is this here?
Take me. Hey! Your firm breasts call out to me from under your clothes. You put up a cold front, Madame Dronya, but a firm touch is all it takes to dull your icy demeanor. Isn't that right? Hey!
You'd better stop touching me.
Are you alright? You should have told me you weren't feeling well.
So that's Labyrinth of Refrain. It's just as hardcore a first-person dungeon crawling RPG as any other game in the genre. I've always considered party customization and dungeon exploration to be the hallmarks of the genre, so I think hardcore fans of these games will dig what NIST did in regards to those aspects of the game. It is, however, really hard to recommend to people who aren't into the genre. That said, it does have some advantages over similar games. The first up is that even though the party customization system can seem incredibly daunting and time-consuming, it's such a rewarding system. Seeing your party grow larger over time really enticed me to keep going with the game, and it's something I haven't really experienced in any other game in the RPG genre. The next is a fairly minimal death penalty. Sure, you'll lose some stuff, but I'll take that any day compared to the hours of lost progress, items, and XP I've experienced in other games in the genre. It's also worth noting that having this on a console makes all the difference in my opinion. I really don't like playing long complex games like this on a 3DS or Vita, which is where most of these games have come out in the past. The Switch is an especially great system for it because you can take it off screen for grinding or play in a more comfortable sitting position. The console rest mode as well as the game's suspense save data make it easy to pause a long session too, which is great. Although I'll warn you, on Switch the counter doesn't stop when you put it in rest mode, so I have no idea how many hours I've actually put into this thing because my counter is wicked high.
Get the hell out of here, you degenerate freak!
Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk comes out digitally and physically on September 18th. There's a limited edition at the NIS America store which includes an art book, soundtrack, tarot cards, and more. The PS4 version of it was sold out at the time of this recording, but the Switch version was still available if you're interested. So in the end, despite my previous failings with the genre, I did enjoy Labyrinth of Refrain quite a bit. I plan to go back to it and really enhance my party a lot more and see how much more I can get out of it. Despite the narrative up and downs, which I think were the biggest problem with the game, it did have a lot of enjoyable parts. Again, it really does lean into its genre tropes, so you really have to enjoy those games or really want to give those games a solid shot to get into it. But if you dug the stuff I showed in the review, it might be worth checking out for you. So thanks for checking out this review. We do plan to get back to retrospectives and keep doing more reviews like this. Thanks for checking out the channel. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.